A silver spoon taps porcelain. Once, twice, like a judge's gavel in a drawing room. Candlelight warms the tablecloth. Lace, clean hands, soft laughter. A gentleman in a polished waistcoat leans over a tiny jar as if it contains saffron or some rare tea. Inside, a brown powder, fine as snuff, dry as old paper. The label is neat, respectable, almost holy. Mumia, not a spice, not a mineral, not a curiosity from some polite museum. A person, ground down until the scandal fits in glass. He pinches a little between finger and thumb. It clings to the skin, reluctant. The scent rises faintly sweet, resinous, like burnt incense left too long near a flame. Behind it, something else. A stale, ancient dryness. The smell of a closed room that has not seen breath in centuries. He tips the pinch onto his tongue. A soft cough. A wince he hides behind manners. The taste is chalk and bitterness, tar in miniature, dust that steals moisture as it goes down, turning saliva into paste. He swallows anyway, because the price was high and the promise was higher. Strength, vitality, relief, a body mended by another body. Across the room, someone jokes about the poor, about their filth, their faucets, their vice, their low ways. Meanwhile, the wealthy man licks the last grains from his lip. No ceremony, no guilt, just confidence in a label. This is Victorian medicine at its finest. Moral outrage in the mouth, and powdered dead humans in the throat. Somewhere far away, a tomb stands emptied. Somewhere closer, an apothecary locks a cabinet. Somewhere closer still, a grinder turns a pestle with steady hands. And in this pretty room, a man who considers himself civilized is practicing cannibalism with a napkin on his lap. Stay with that spoon. Stay with that powder. After this, it's hard to take their sermon seriously. Call it mummy powder, and people imagine a joke, a party trick, a tall tale to spook children. It wasn't a joke. It was a trade. For centuries, Europeans bought a substance called Mumia and treated it like a cure with a passport. At first, the word had an excuse, something like bitumen, resin, pitch. Dark, sticky stuff scraped from rocks and sold as medicine. Easy to swallow as an idea. A mineral from the East, a strange balm from far away. Then language did what it always does when greed gets involved. The word slid, the meaning followed the money. Soon Mumia wasn't only resin. It was bodies. Egyptian corpses. Desiccated remains. Anything old and dry enough to be crushed. Anything dark enough to look authentic. Anything that could be shaved, chipped, pounded, sifted, and bottled. And when genuine mummies became harder to get, the market didn't stop. It simply lied harder. Substitutes appeared, fresh corpses dried and treated, passed off as ancient. Dirt mixed in, pitch mixed in. Ground bone from whoever couldn't fight back mixed in. The label stayed elegant. The contents grew more obscene. Who bought it? Not the starving, not the sewer man, not the factory worker coughing up black phlegm. The buyers were the people with cabinets, the people with leisure, the people who liked their health served in small doses with Latin names, the ones who could afford a cure that came with a story. They would never chew meat from a stranger's body in the street, too crude, too honest, but offer them the same act in powder form, measured, refined, sold behind glass, and watch how quickly disgust becomes treatment. That's the hypocrisy you can taste. They scold the poor for living close to death, then pay to swallow death in a teaspoon. They lecture about clean living, then rub ancient remains into their gums like holy ash. They call themselves rational, enlightened, advanced. Yet the moment fear arrives, fear of weakness, fear of weakness, fear of time, their reason collapses into superstition dressed as pharmacy. Now, before we open that cabinet wider, If you've got the stomach to keep walking into this with me, leave a like now. Consider it the price of admission. Because the further we go, the clearer the pattern becomes. Victorian society didn't stop at exploiting the living. It found a way to consume the dead and still keep its manners. And it did it with a straight face. The apothecary shop smells like camphor, soap, and money trying to mask the truth. Glass jars line the shelves like a church of ingredients. Powders, roots, dried leaves, bright liquids that promise miracles to anyone with coin and panic. Behind the counter, a scale waits delicate, precise, ready to weigh sins by the gram. Ask for Mumia, and the clerk doesn't flinch. No grimace, no whisper. He retrieves a small container with the calm of a man selling pepper. Respectability is the real packaging. In the back room, the work begins. Not surgery, not an operating theater. Something quieter, worse in its own way. A lump is placed on a cloth. Dark, brittle, not wet, not fresh, old enough to behave like wood. It breaks under pressure with a dry complaint, as if even the material resents being handled. A mortar waits, stone, heavy, patient. Down comes the pestle. Crack, grind, press, twist. The sound is soft and final, like a bone being reduced to an idea. Each turn makes the pieces smaller. Each turn makes the truth easier to swallow. A body becomes a commodity by losing its shape. Dust rises. It doesn't bloom like flower. It drifts reluctantly, carrying a faint resinous tang. Not the smell of the kitchen. The smell of a closed chest, of linen, of old oils, of ancient preservation and modern greed meeting in the air. Sift it, bottle it, label it. The label is the most obscene part. Neat handwriting, Latin, a tidy price. No mention of the tomb. No mention of theft. No mention of how many hands touched the remains between desert and drawing room. No mention of the markets that sold authenticity to fools and aristocrats alike. Only a promise. This will help you. Back upstairs, the client arrives gloved, perfumed, impatient. A man who would recoil at the smell of a hospital ward. A woman who would faint at the sight of a slaughterhouse. They speak of health the way they speak of fashion. Something to be purchased, something to be worn. A small spoon appears, a glass of water, a confident nod, powder onto tongue. The mouth betrays the lie instantly. It dries, it protests. The taste is bitter and flat, with a tar note that clings. The throat wants to reject it, but pride forces the swallow. He does it again the next day, and again. Because the ritual is not about evidence. It is about control. Fear makes the wealthy childish. Fear makes them prey to jars. And the sellers know it. They sell courage in small containers. They sell ancient power. They sell the thrill of consuming something rare, something forbidden, something that turns sickness into a transaction. Somewhere in this chain, a grave has been robbed twice. Once by the man who took the body, and again by the man who sold it as medicine. And the buyer? The buyer congratulates himself for being modern. That's the laughable part. He thinks the poor are savage because they live near death. He never notices that he is paying to put death inside himself. Under candlelight, with clean linen and polite conversation, the act becomes almost invisible. No blood, no screams, just powder, just swallowing, just a quiet, private appetite. Civilization, it turns out, is often just barbarism with better handwriting. A city can build sewers and call it progress. It can build hospitals and call it mercy. It can dress its doctors like priests and pretend science has scrubbed the world clean. Then the same city sells powdered corpses in respectable shops. That is the Victorian genius, splitting morality into rooms. One room for public virtue, another for private appetite. Listen to how they speak. They don't say, "I am eating the dead." Too ugly, too honest. They say a remedy, a preparation, a harmless dose. They don't say grave robbery. They say import. They say antiquity. They say a rare commodity. They don't say desperation. They say health conscious. And if a poor man steals bread, he's a criminal. If a rich man swallows a stranger from a tomb, he's a client. Even the skepticism of the era doesn't fully save them. Some physicians mocked the practice. Some warned that the supply chain was riddled with fraud, yet the jars stayed stocked. The cabinets stayed locked. The polite continued to buy because the point was never only the medicine. The point was the permission. Permission to believe in magic while calling themselves rational. Permission to exploit the dead while preaching morality to the living. Permission to turn someone else's remains into a personal talisman against illness. That's what I'm judging here. Not merely the powder, the arrogance that made it marketable. And it fits neatly with what you've already seen in this world. The poor blamed for filth. The poor paid to handle filth. The poor punished for surviving, while the wealthy find refined ways to do far worse and still keep their reputations intact. Now, if you want the next layer, the collectors, the parties, the cabinets, the thin line between medicine and entertainment, subscribe. Don't leave me digging alone. Because these stories weren't buried by accident. They were buried by manners. A civilization that can swallow a corpse and still sneer at the starving is not civilized. It's just well fed. Somewhere, the spoon taps porcelain again. Once, twice. A verdict delivered softly. Eventually, the practice fades. Better chemistry arrives. Better standards tighten the shelves. The world learns slowly that swallowing a story doesn't make it true. Still, the stain remains, not on the tongue, on the idea of superiority. Victorian elites loved to brand themselves as the clean end of history, the advanced class, the rational class, the class destined to improve the world. Then they bought a dead stranger in a bottle. That's not an accident of the past. That's a habit of power. It condemns the poor for being dirty, then profits from filth in private. It calls itself enlightened, then clings to superstition when fear whispers in the night. So here's the question I want left on the table, like an unwashed instrument. If you lived then money in your pocket, a physician's reassurance in your ear, would you have swallowed the powder anyway? Be honest, not noble. Honest. Put your answer in the comments. Tell me where your disgust would actually begin, at the act itself, or only at the thought of being seen doing it. Because that's the final joke. The era didn't fear cannibalism as a sin. It feared cannibalism as a scandal, candlelight, lace, a silver spoon. A polite mouth doing an impolite thing.